My parents treated me like a miracle while erasing my sister from existence, then ignored her passing to celebrate my birthday, so I used her diary to reveal their abuse, and destroyed their lives with one perfectly timed moment of revenge. My parents treated me like a miracle while erasing my sister from existence, then ignored her passing to celebrate my birthday. So I used her diary to reveal their abuse and destroyed their lives with one perfectly timed moment of revenge. Growing up, my parents coddled me like I was some kind of miracle boy. Every little thing I did was celebrated, and everything I wanted was handed to me. Mediocre grades meant getting taken out to my favorite restaurants, and I had a weekly allowance of $35 at 6 years old. They posted every detail about my life on Facebook, bragging about me like I was their prized possession. But the problem was, I wasn't their only kid. My sister Ava was 3 years younger than me, and she was the total opposite in their eyes. A failure. A screw-up deserving of nothing. Some of their friends didn't even know Ava existed. That's how little they talked about her. But the thing was, Ava was amazing. She was better than me at school, sports, making friends, but my parents didn't care. They didn't just not care either. They'd force her to lose her friends or drop her grades, so I don't feel ashamed. It hurt her a lot. Every time I looked in her eyes, she was on the verge of crying. So when I was 8, I sat her down, and Pinky promised her that from today, I'd be the best big brother ever. And so from that day on, every time she brought home a good grade, I'd hype her up and use my allowance to buy her ice cream. I'd persuade our parents into going to her games by saying that I wanted to go. Every time our parents dismissed her achievements, I'd be the first one there, clapping for her and making her feel like every child should feel loved, heard, and seen. Our bond grew extremely strong over the years, but then tragedy struck. I was coming home from my first year of college, and my parents had planned a huge celebration for my 19th birthday. I told them I didn't want all that, but they never listened. Just kept planning everything for me. I told them again, I didn't care about that. The thing I wanted most was to spend time with Ava again. She was 16 now, bright and full of life despite everything she went through. They just chuckled at me, saying why would I want to spend time with their reject little sister? I ignored them. A few days before my birthday, Ava came bouncing into my room, holding this scrapbook she'd been making for months. She showed me pages filled with pictures and memories from our childhood. It's not finished yet, she said, smiling proudly. I still need a few more things to make it perfect. I hugged her tight. And then, just 3 days before the party, it happened. Eva was in a horrible car accident on her way to get art supplies for the scrapbook. She didn't make it. I collapsed to the floor when I heard crying so hard it felt like my soul was tearing apart. And all my parents could do was exchange a cold glance. My mother's first words were, "We'll need to adjust the birthday arrangements." The days after felt surreal. My parents mechanically arranged a sparse funeral, barely seeming to register what had happened. Instead, they obsessed over the details of my birthday party. When I begged them to cancel, my mom just said cheerfully, "Life goes on. Ava wouldn't want us to cancel your special day." But all I saw was them spending more time choosing my birthday cake than Ava's coffin. Cleaning out her room was unbearable. I sat in the middle of her floor, surrounded by her clothes and art supplies, tears streaming down my face. That's when I found her diary. Every page broke me a little more, reading about how deeply she felt our parents' rejection, but never blaming me. "Max is the only one who sees me," she wrote. "He makes me feel like I matter." The scrapbook was there too, unfinished. At the funeral, I gave a eulogy that left everyone in tears. Everyone except our parents who stood there, expressionless. Afterward, Dad pulled me aside, whispering, "Let's put this behind us. We have your birthday dinner reservations at 7. I felt sick to my stomach. On my birthday, the house was decorated lavishly. My parents handed me expensive gifts and revealed a huge cake reading our perfect son. I sat there numb with grief until Mom chirped, "Enough moping, Max. Ava had her day yesterday. Today is about you." It was like getting punched in the gut. I stood up, shaking with anger and sadness, asking how they could possibly celebrate. My father calmly replied, "We've always known you were special." Ava understood her place. That's when something snapped inside me. I exploded, telling them exactly how Ava felt. Unloved, invisible, and how I spent my entire life trying to shield her from their cruelty. My mother rolled her eyes, calling it teenage dramatics, while Dad shrugged and said, "Let's focus on the positive. We still have you." Tears blurred my vision. I grabbed the cake and hurled it against the wall. "I can't do this," I said, my voice shaking. Mom started theatrically sobbing, accusing me of betrayal, while Dad threatened to cut me off financially. I stared at them coldly and said, "You already cut me off in every way that matters." I packed my things, my hands trembling, and took Eva's scrapbook and diary, the only things left worth keeping, and headed out. Or at least I tried. Because my mother blocked me. "You're not leaving," she yelled. She screamed, her face contorted with rage. I tried pushing past my mother to leave with Ava's belongings, but she grabbed my arm with surprising strength, her nails digging into my skin. I instinctively pulled away, causing her to stumble backward into the wall, her head hitting with a dull thud. Dad rushed to Mom's side, checking her for injuries and glaring at me with pure hatred. But instead of backing down, I stood my ground, clutching Ava's diary to my chest. Dad's face contorted with rage as he lunged at me, trying to grab the diary while shouting that I had no right to take family property. I dodged his grasp and backed toward the door, telling them I was leaving and they couldn't stop me. But Dad threatened to call the police and report me for assault and theft. Panic surged through me as I realized they might actually take Eva's memories away from me. So I quickly stuffed the diary and scrapbook into my backpack. Mom recovered and started crying dramatically, begging me not to leave and saying they'd forgive me if I stayed. But her tears seemed hollow after years of watching her ignore Ava's pain. I told them I needed space and would be staying with my roommate Jake for a few days, hoping this compromise would diffuse the situation. Dad seemed to calm down slightly at my more reasonable tone and reluctantly stepped aside. But as I reached the door, he whispered, "If you leave now, don't expect any more tuition payments." I paused, the reality of potentially losing my education hitting me hard. But remembering Ava gave me strength to walk out anyway, saying, "Some things matter more than money." I crashed at Jake's apartment, emotionally exhausted, but relieved to be away from my parents. But after 3 days, my bank account was suddenly emptied, and my credit card declined when I tried to buy groceries. I called the bank in a panic, only to discover my parents had removed me from our joint accounts and canceled the cards they had co-signed. I applied for emergency financial aid at the university and picked up extra shifts at my campus job to stay afloat. But my parents started spreading lies to extended family, claiming I'd had a mental breakdown after Ava's death and become violent. Relatives I'd been close with started sending concerned messages or avoiding me altogether, leaving me feeling increasingly isolated. I decided to read through Ava's diary completely, hoping to find comfort in her words. But what I discovered was far worse than I imagined. Detailed accounts of emotional abuse when I wasn't around and hints that our parents had deliberately sabotaged a scholarship opportunity that would have been her ticket to freedom. I felt physically sick with guilt for not seeing the full extent of their cruelty and became determined to clear Ava's name somehow. I reached out to Ava's best friend Emma to share what I'd learned and possibly get more insight. But when we met at a coffee shop, I noticed someone watching us, my father sitting in his car across the street. Emma and I moved our conversation to her apartment, where she revealed Ava had been secretly recording our parents' behavior on her phone for months before the accident. Emma explained that Ava's phone had been returned to our parents after the accident, but she had backed up some of the recordings to a cloud account she shared with Emma for a school project. We spent hours listening to the recordings, hearing my mother tell Ava she was a mistake, and my father threatening to send her to a boarding school if she overshadowed me again, providing concrete evidence of their abuse. Armed with Ava's recordings, I decided to confront my parents one more time, hoping they'd finally acknowledge what they'd done. But when I arrived at the house, I found them hosting a dinner party with family friends, acting like grieving parents. I lost my composure and played one of the recordings loudly from my phone, causing shocked silence to fall over the gathering, as my mother's voice clearly said, "We only wanted one child, Ava. Max was enough." The guests looked horrified, and my parents scrambled to explain it away as Ava manipulating conversations. But my Aunt Susan, who had always been kind to Ava, stood up and asked them point blank if they had always treated Ava differently. The room divided, with some guests awkwardly leaving while others stayed, creating a tense standoff as my parents realized their carefully crafted image was crumbling. Dad pulled me into his study, offering to reinstate my financial support if I stopped this nonsense and told everyone the recordings were fake. But I refused to betray Ava again, even for financial security. He changed tactics, threatening to sue me for defamation and destroying the family, showing he cared more about appearances than acknowledging the truth. I returned to the living room to find Mom sobbing to the remaining guests about how ungrateful her children were. But Aunt Susan was looking through Eva's scrapbook, which I had brought with me, seeing the stark difference between family photos and the private moments Eva had captured with just me. Susan confronted my parents directly, asking why there were no pictures of them celebrating Ava's achievements, despite evidence of her many awards and accomplishments. The confrontation escalated as my parents tried to physically remove me and the evidence from the house, but Aunt Susan and her husband intervened, standing between us. My father finally snapped, shouting, "Fine. We never wanted her. Are you happy now?" causing even their most loyal friends to stare in disbelief at the admission. In the aftermath of my father's outburst, the remaining guests quickly left, leaving just my parents, Aunt Susan, her husband, and me in stunned silence. But my parents quickly tried to backtrack, claiming they were just upset and didn't mean it. I played more recordings from Ava's collection, methodically exposing years of their emotional abuse until they couldn't deny it anymore. Aunt Susan, visibly shaken, offered me a place to stay and help with college expenses, but my parents threatened to cut her off from the family if she took sides. Susan stood her ground, revealing she'd always suspected something was wrong and regretted not intervening sooner, effectively choosing to support me regardless of their threats. I gathered more of Ava's belongings to take with me to Susan's house, but discovered my parents had already packed up most of her room with boxes labeled donations sitting in the garage. I frantically searched through them, rescuing Eva's art portfolios, awards, and personal items they were trying to erase, feeling like I was saving pieces of her all over again. Over the following weeks, I worked with Susan to create a memorial scholarship in Ava's name at her high school, using her artwork and achievements to tell her story. But my parents hired a lawyer, claiming we were slandering them and demanding we stop using family photos or Ava's artwork without their permission. We reached out to Emma and other friends of Ava's, collecting their photos and memories instead, creating a tribute that celebrated her through the eyes of people who truly valued her. On what would have been Ava's 17th birthday, we held a memorial art show at her school, displaying her work and announcing the scholarship. But I struggled with overwhelming grief and guilt, wondering if I could have done more to protect her. As I stood surrounded by people who had come to celebrate Ava's life and talent, I finally completed her scrapbook, adding the last pages with photos from the memorial, fulfilling my to be the best brother I could be, even after she was gone, and ensuring that Ava would always be remembered not as the forgotten child, but as the extraordinary person she truly was. The memorial art show for Ava became a turning point, as several teachers approached me, sharing how they'd noticed the disparity in how my parents treated us, but they admitted they'd never reported it because my parents were respected community members who always had plausible explanations. I realized the full extent of my parents' manipulation. They hadn't just fooled me, but had created an entire facade that kept others from intervening. With Aunt Susan's support, I began therapy to process my grief and guilt over Ava's death. But during a session, I received multiple frantic texts from Emma saying my parents were at her house demanding she remove Ava's cloud backups. I rushed over to find my parents threatening Emma with legal action for stealing private family recordings, causing her parents to consider giving in to avoid trouble. I showed Emma's parents some of the recordings to explain why preserving them mattered, but my father claimed I was exploiting Ava's death to turn people against them. Emma's dad, a former counselor, recognized the manipulation tactics and firmly asked my parents to leave, telling them any further harassment would result in a restraining order. Word spread through our community about my parents' behavior, causing people to quietly distance themselves. But my parents responded by announcing a large donation to the school in beloved daughter Ava's memory, attempting to rewrite history and reclaim their reputation. I felt physically ill seeing them use Ava as a prop after death when they'd ignored her in life and decided I needed stronger boundaries to protect my own mental health. I changed my phone number and blocked my parents on social media, focusing instead on my studies and healing. But they somehow obtained my class schedule and ambushed me on campus, causing a scene by loudly proclaiming they just wanted to reconcile with their grieving son. I was forced to walk away while dozens of curious students watched. Later learning my parents had told the department secretary they were surprising me with a grief care package to get my schedule. The University Counseling Center helped me file for a no-contact directive after the campus incident, giving me some breathing room. But my parents then approached my roommate Jake, manipulating him with stories about my fragile mental state and how they just wanted to make sure I was safe. Jake, though well-meaning, began monitoring me and reporting back to them, unknowingly becoming their spy. I discovered Jake's betrayal when I saw texts on his phone while borrowing it to call Susan. Rather than confronting him immediately, I decided to use the situation to my advantage. I began feeding Jake carefully crafted misinformation about my plans and feelings, creating a false narrative my parents eagerly consumed. Using this strategy, I let slip to Jake that I was considering writing a detailed account of our family dynamics for a psychology class, but added that I was nervous about including the recordings because I wasn't sure if they were legally obtained. My parents, predictably, sent a cease and desist letter through their lawyer, inadvertently acknowledging the recordings were authentic by trying to suppress them. The lawyer's letter demanded I return all property belonging to the family, including diaries, recordings, and photographs. But I had already created secure digital backups of everything with Susan's help. When I showed the letter to my therapist, she recognized it as continued emotional abuse and suggested I consider legal options to protect myself. I consulted with a family law attorney who reviewed Ava's recordings and my documentation, but explained that while the evidence showed clear emotional abuse, legal action would be expensive and emotionally draining. The attorney instead helped me draft a powerful response letter detailing exactly how my parents had failed both their children with specific examples from the recordings, ending with my terms for any future contact. My letter to my parents included conditions: acknowledge their treatment of Ava, attend family therapy if they wanted any relationship with me, and stop the public performance of grieving parents. But instead of responding directly, they showed up at Aunt Susan's house unannounced, demanding to speak with me. Susan called me at work, warning me not to come home until they left, as they were becoming increasingly agitated. I finished my shift and headed to Emma's place instead, but noticed my father's car following me through traffic. When I took several random turns to confirm I was being followed, he stayed right behind me. I drove directly to the police station where I explained the situation and asked for help, resulting in an officer speaking to my father about harassment. The police intervention temporarily stopped the following, but escalated my parents' tactics as they began contacting my professors with concerns about my academic performance. But one professor, Dr. Chen, had lost her own sister and saw through their manipulation. She connected me with the dean of students who implemented additional protections for my educational privacy. With the university now aware of the situation, I felt safer on campus. But my parents pivoted to a new strategy, reaching out to mutual friends and family with a story that I was keeping Ava's ashes from them and preventing proper closure. I had to contact the funeral home for documentation proving my parents had declined receiving her ashes, choosing the cheapest disposal option instead. The funeral home's documentation exposed another lie, causing several family members to finally see the pattern of manipulation. But my parents, cornered by the truth, made one last desperate move, showing up at my workplace claiming a family emergency to get me to come outside. When I refused to leave my shift, they created a scene so disruptive that my manager had to threaten to call security, putting my job at risk. After the workplace incident, I decided I needed to confront my parents once and for all, arranging to meet them at a public park with Susan present as a witness. But when we arrived, I was shocked to see they'd brought several family members and friends, attempting to stage an intervention for my unhealthy obsession with Ava's death. I remained calm and addressed the group directly, asking if they knew why they had really been gathered. I connected my phone to a portable speaker and played a compilation of the most damning recordings of my parents' treatment of Ava, but my father lunged forward, trying to grab my phone and stop the playback. Susan stepped between us, while the assembled friends and family members listened in growing horror to my mother telling Ava she was nothing compared to her brother. As the recordings continued, some family members tried to leave, uncomfortable with what they were hearing. But my parents blocked their path, insisting everything was being taken out of context. My cousin Tyler, who had been close to Ava, stood up and shared his own observations of how they'd treated her at family gatherings, opening the floodgates for others to speak up. One by one, people shared small moments they'd witnessed: Ava being ignored at Christmas while I received piles of gifts, her achievements being dismissed, the constant comparisons creating a devastating collective testimony. But my parents became increasingly defensive, eventually shouting that everyone was ganging up on them. My usually quiet grandfather stood up and told them, "I've heard enough," before walking away, followed by almost everyone else. Left with just us and two stubborn family friends, my father finally dropped the facade, coldly stating that they had always known I was the special one, and Ava was just average. But I pulled out the final piece of evidence: Ava's academic record showing she had qualified for advanced placement in multiple subjects, alongside rejection letters with my parents' signatures declining these opportunities. Their last supporters finally saw the truth, leaving my parents truly alone with the consequences of their actions for the first time. In the weeks following the park confrontation, extended family rallied around me, sharing their regrets for not seeing the truth sooner. But I struggled with accepting their support, wondering where they had been when Ava needed them. I started a family discussion group focused on recognizing signs of favoritism and emotional abuse, turning our painful experience into an opportunity for growth and awareness. My parents made one final attempt to regain control, threatening to sell our childhood home, where I still hope to retrieve more of Ava's belongings if I didn't end this nonsense. But Aunt Susan and Uncle Dave offered to buy the house themselves, neutralizing the threat. I was able to thoroughly search the house before they moved in, discovering a hidden box of Eva's awards and accomplishments my parents had kept from us both. The Eva Evans Memorial Scholarship gained momentum, with enough donations to support 2 students annually. But I worried that as time passed, people would forget the real Eva behind the scholarship. I worked with Emma and Ava's art teacher to create a permanent exhibition of her work in the school gallery, ensuring her talent would continue inspiring others. As the 1-year anniversary of Ava's death approached, I braced myself for renewed grief, but instead, found unexpected healing in completing a project she'd never finished. A children's book she'd been illustrating about 2 siblings who could only see the stars when they were together. I partnered with a local publisher to release Starlight Siblings under Ava's name, with proceeds going to her scholarship fund. At the book launch, I prepared myself for my parents possibly showing up to cause a scene, but instead, received a thin envelope containing a brief note acknowledging they had made mistakes with Ava, along with her birth bracelet from the hospital. While it wasn't the full accountability I'd hoped for, I recognized it as perhaps the first honest moment from them in years. Not enough for reconciliation, but enough to help me move forward, knowing that through the scholarship, the art exhibition, and now her book, Ava had finally become visible to everyone. Her light no longer dimmed by anyone. Her story told in her own voice and her legacy one of creativity and resilience rather than victimhood. Fulfilling my childhood promise to be the best brother possible by ensuring she would never be forgotten or diminished again.